Hey guys, today I'm doing a product review and overview of this 3-inch cutoff tool. This is McGraw brand from Harbor Freight. I like Harbor Freight tools, I like coupons, and so I wanted to expand my air tool collection. So this accepts a 3-inch cutoff blade. I've always had good luck with Dewalt cutoff blades, so that's just my preference here. But in a lot of ways, this review might not even be specific to this particular one. It's more just this tool in general. What can an air cutoff tool do? So first off, I really like the handle. It's got a rubberized composite type handle on it, so it's supposed to dampen some vibration, prevent it from like being cold in your hands from all the air rushing through it. It just gives it a nice little stylistic look. Another thing is that it does come with an Allen wrench, which is what you use to swap out your blade, and it comes with a little collet wrench that holds the spinning arbor here, so you can hold the chuck still. And I'm going to go ahead and just install this blade. As with any type of cutting tool, whether it's a die grinder, a Dremel, or an angle grinder, you want to make sure that the blade or abrasive that you're putting on is going to be rated for at least the RPM of what your tool is, if not a little bit higher. You don't want to overspin a blade and cause it to fall apart. So as with any type of cutting tool, you also want to make sure you're using safety glasses, hearing protection if you got a loud air compressor, and make sure that you got some gloves and be mindful of where you aim your sparks. So just reading off some of the specs, 3-inch air cutoff tool. It's a 1/4-inch NPT threads, which is your standard air fittings. In my instance, I have type V high flow fittings. And so I'm not an air tool expert, but I can just say that it's got a pretty solid feel in your hand. I like the way that it feels, and I'm excited to see what this tool can do. As with any type of air tool, you're usually going to be limited by your air supply. So you can get the best performing air tool, but if you put it up on a 6-gallon pancake air compressor, you're not gonna have good performance. So in my case, I'm using a 20-gallon Husky air compressor rated at 4.0 CFM at 90 PSI. It's 1.5 horsepower, and the tank is at 165 PSI. So my second smaller air compressor is an 8-gallon Kobalt air compressor. This is also rated at 4.0 CFM at 90 PSI. So I'm going to do a series of tasks with this cutoff tool, and I'm going to evaluate how it works. I'm going to start with my 20-gallon air compressor, and if it does the task very easily, then I'm going to go ahead and hook it up to my smaller one to try and get a gauge for a typical homeowner style air supply. What can you actually expect this to do for you? So because I'm not watching the gauges, I'm not going to stop immediately once the compressor turns on. I'm going to just continue to use the tool until it starts to get into a low performance that I would deem objectionable. So I'm looking for the blade stalling out or chattering of the blade, and if that happens, I will stop completely and let the air compressor fill the tank up completely. So the first task that I have for it is just going to be a straight sheet metal cut. I've got an old bracket laying around. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick and about 5 inches long. So this is going to really tax this type of cutting tool. It's not really necessarily meant for heavy fabrication, but I want to see if the 20-gallon air compressor can do it. So I'm going to go ahead and cycle the tank a second time and see if I can finish off this cut and finish it out. So to make that cut in 1/8 inch thick material, it took 2 full cycles of the air compressor tank, the 20-gallon one, and it took about 12 minutes of clock time. This is not really where a 3-inch cutoff tool shines. That's not really what it's used for, but I wanted to kind of test it and see how it would work. The next task that I have for it is going to be an M12 grade 8.8 bolt. This is more in line with what a cutoff tool is really good for, is cutting off pieces of wire or strapping. So the cutoff tool easily handled this M12 grade 8.8 bolt with the 20-gallon air compressor. So I went ahead and I switched over to my 8-gallon Kobalt air compressor. We're going to give this a try. So you can see the first cut with the 8-gallon air compressor, it made it pretty deep through the 12mm bolt. about 3/4 of the way through. The air compressor is now recharged, so we'll go ahead and finish the job. So I'd say proportionally the 20-gallon air compressor was quite a bit easier. It took one cycle of the tank to get through the 12mm bolt. The hot dog style air compressor took 2 cycles of the tank, and it did it pretty good. I will say this though, that you do have to wait for it to cycle, and it would get really tedious and old if you had, for instance, say 8 total U-bolt ends to cut off. Either one of these methods would be pretty tedious if you had a long line of things that you had to cut. I'm going to move it down a size now. This is just an M8 fastener, so 8mm. So I expect both of these air compressors to be able to make it through this with one cycle of the tank pretty easily. So right now I have the tool plugged into the 20-gallon air compressor, and let's see how it does on 8mm. So I was actually kind of surprised how long it took to get through that 8mm fastener with the 20-gallon air tank. We're going to try it with the 8-gallon now and see how it goes. So 8mm on the 8-gallon tank. It cut it through with one, I'd say, deep cycle of the overall air compressor and tank. It was definitely struggling towards the end. But I could see it was just hanging on by a thread, so I just let it go for the last few seconds, even though it was kind of struggling and starting to chatter a little bit. But both air compressors were able to get through an 8mm fastener relatively easy. The next fastener I'm going to do is 1/4 inch, so this is the 6.35 range, and of course, as you can see, I'm getting smaller and smaller with what I'm asking it to do. It should start to get very easy for both of the air compressors to cut these things off, but let's see how fast it goes on a 1/4 inch. 20-gallon Husky air compressor on 1/4 inch. So the 20-gallon air compressor cut through the 1/4 inch bolt on one cycle. The compressor had literally just kicked on right as the end of the bolt fell off, so it was borderline not even consuming enough air to trigger the compressor. I went ahead and switched over to the 8-gallon, and we're going to see how this does. The 8-gallon air compressor cut through the 1/4 inch very easily on the first cycle. Again, if it was a one-off type thing, like you're trying to cut something off of an old rusted up truck, I think either of these compressors would probably do the job. But if you've got, say, 8 bolts lined up in a row that you got to cut off, it could get tedious quick, I would say, with any of these homeowner grade, consumer grade air compressors. Now the last test that I have for it is some thin metal strapping. This is along the lines of what I would say like a hose clamp might be made out of. So I'm running the 20-gallon air compressor on this thin piece of metal. So I've got the 8-gallon Kobalt air compressor hooked up, and we're going to cut through this thin strapping. The 20-gallon air compressor got 2 full cuts through the strapping before it turned the compressor itself on. But the 8-gallon air compressor, I made about 2 cuts easily. The compressor did kick on, and I did get through a third too, and I probably could have done more if I really wanted to really drain the tank low until it was starting to get performance issues. So let's recap what we saw that this McGraw air cutoff tool can do. The tool itself, able to cut through 1/8 inch steel plate, 5-inch cut long. That took a 20-gallon air compressor, and even that was borderline, so I definitely didn't even bother trying that on the 8-gallon air compressor. Both air compressors were able to get through a 12mm bolt pretty good. Again, this is one of those things, if it's a one-off type thing, either one of them could do it, but the bigger capacity of the 20-gallon air compressor would definitely make it easier if you had multiple bolts to cut off. You get down to 8mm bolts, and both air compressors handle that pretty well. 1/4-inch bolts, easy, no problem. 20-gallon air compressor cuts through it like butter. The 8-gallon cut through it pretty easily with one light cycle of the air compressor. And the steel strapping, very easy to cut through. If it was an actual hose clamp where it was like secure, not bouncing around like a diving board in my vise, I think it would have cut quite a bit better and shown how it can cut through it. But I say that this is actually a great addition to my metal cutting tools. So I have all of these different tools that can cut through steel, cut through bolts, and cut through strapping. I've got various angle grinders. This is a nice Black & Decker. This one's 15 years old. It's a corded electric. It's got some pretty good power. I've got a Craftsman brushless angle grinder. This one has the V20 battery in it, so that's nice so you don't have the cord dangling around. I've got this Chicago Electric 4-inch angle grinder, so you can put a 4-inch cutoff wheel in here and you can cut through it. And then I got this Dremel. This is a corded Dremel, and you can get a little metal cutoff wheel on that. So really an air cutoff tool to me more closely replaces a Dremel style cutoff wheel. So previously, before I had this air cutoff tool, I would use a Dremel in confined spaces on a vehicle to cut off clamps and small studs and things like that. And it would get the job done, but I just find Dremels, they're just very low power. They're really more geared for hobbyist work. So I'm going to do a quick comparison on this 8mm bolt with the Dremel. So that didn't even get a clean cut through it. It ended up coming out at an angle and the disc seemed like it was kind of wobbling a lot. This is the new Easy Lock, where it's got like a spring-loaded arbor. But you can see as a result of that, I didn't even get a straight cut through the bolt. So really there's no comparison. Light duty work, very fine, intricate, small stuff, but if you're cutting through a piece of hardware, an air cutoff tool is the way to go. I will add that I purchased this McGraw air cutoff tool at my local Harbor Freight. I did use a 20% off super coupon because you should never go shopping at Harbor Freight without a coupon. But this is not a sponsored video or anything. This was just me trying to evaluate and test. On a whim, I purchased this because I thought that it would, be helpful in certain circumstances, and I'm quite satisfied with the performance of it. And again, take that with a grain of salt, assuming that you have the air to push it. Even if I only had my 8-gallon air compressor, I would still purchase it. I think that it'll still be able to get through kind of one-off things where otherwise you're using a Dremel that takes a long time. So thanks for watching, and like and subscribe if you enjoy the content of these videos. Comment below if you have questions or suggestions for future videos.